always been fascinated by billionaires, okay? Maybe it's because I'm Midwest trash, but I frickin' love it. They're giving me a lot to be fascinated by, in my defense. They're going to space. They're surfing with the American flag. They're complicit in all sorts of global atrocities and workers' rights violations that I don't really have the energy to get into right now, but like someone should totally look into that. The story I want to talk about today, though, is about one billionaire in particular who did something so like specifically crazy that it really set him apart from the pack. This 97-year-old billionaire at the end of his life wanted to give back, so he decided that the best way to do that was to donate a dorm building to UC Santa Barbara. One caveat though, he got to design the building. That was his like one condition. So this 97-year-old billionaire with no background in architecture wound up donating a 4,000 dorm building with exactly 240 windows. That's 240 windows, 3,760 dark windowless concrete rooms. And it really goes to show you that like even when a billionaire is actively trying his best to be a good person, he still just can't help himself from building a private prison. It comes way too naturally. I just picture like him finally showing his designs to the school administrators and they're just like, yeah, it looks great. Why'd you make it so all the doors only lock from the outside? He's just like, I gotta be honest, didn't even occur to me that there'd be another way to do it. Let's get into the actual story. Okay, so this is a BuzzFeed article from when the story first broke. Oh, how I fucking love getting my news from BuzzFeed, baby. I just love reading a harrowing article about a family of tourists getting decapitated by a drug cartel and then immediately taking a quiz to find out which Hunger Games character I am. Not to brag, but I almost always get Katniss's clinically depressed mom. Alright, so here we go. Students at the University of California, Santa Barbara are freaking out about a proposed new dorm that will house over 4,000 students. Is house the right word? I feel like trap or imprison or eventually forced to drop out of school would kind of be the better phrasing there. What's crazy is that in the drawing, there's actually a lot of windows. He just did it for the drawing. He's like, yeah, I had to put in windows on the drawing, otherwise the drawing would look insane, but don't worry, the real building will just be a windowless cement block. Because it's Munger's way or the highway, he has decided that 94% of the bedrooms, which by the way are only 7 by 10, will not have windows. Instead, only some of the common areas will have windows in an attempt to get students out of their bedrooms to socialize. Ah, and what pleasant socializing that will be. Why, I remember my freshman year when I would huddle in the lone patch of sunlight with the other traumatized teenagers living away from home for the first time. In order to combat the issue of no windows. Okay, I love that he used the phrase combat the issue. It's like you wouldn't have to combat the issue if you didn't just fully create the issue in the first place. Munger has decided to add fake windows that will emit a soft light. Wait, so he added fake windows? A fake window is just a light. First off, to be like, I've decided to add lights. What do you mean decided? Were you thinking about not having lights? I kind of assumed there'd at least be lights in there. Also, I'm sorry, there's just so obviously a difference between having warm sunshine entering your room through a window and artificial fluorescent light pulsing at you from the ceiling. In an interview, Munger said that he modeled the lights off of the fake portholes found in rooms on Disney cruise ships. Okay, he keeps saying it's patterned after Disney cruise ships. Important to note though that for the most part, you're only on a Disney cruise ship for like a weekend. And even then you're on vacation, so you're like at the pool or in restaurants or at port. Living on a Disney cruise ship sounds like hell. This Charles Munger guy is out of his mind. Who is he anyway? Charles Munger. Okay, he's gorgeous? No wonder he thinks he can get away with doing whatever weird shit he wants. He is hot as hell. I'm sorry, but when you look like this, you can build a dorm with floors made of rusty nails and broken glass for all I care. Okay, it says he made his fortune serving as the VP of Berkshire Hathaway. And if you don't know what Berkshire Hathaway does, neither do I. Basically, he's Warren Buffett's right-hand man. Here's a picture of them together. Man, I don't know what it is, but two really old men sitting next to each other is always kind of heartwarming for some reason. There's some threshold that men cross where like two 90-year-old men hanging out together is charming, endearing, cute as a darn button. But two 50-year-old men hanging out together? Gross, off-putting, put a bullet in my head. And I mean put a bullet in my head in like a chill, fun, not at all concerning type of way. Okay? Now let's get down to the real important question. How much money does he have? Charles Munger net worth. $2.6 billion? Damn. I don't even have half that much. But okay, let's give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he couldn't afford Windows. Did anyone ever think of that? Maybe Windows cost $2.7 billion. How much does one window cost? $300. Well, Charles, I tried, buddy. Isn't it crazy that he can have $2.6 billion and his real dream is still just being an architect? That's all he really wants. Clearly the whole reason for him donating the building in the first place is so that he could finally be a guy who designs buildings. Like, on paper, he's already one of the most successful business people of all time, but in his heart, he's just an architect who's waiting for his big break. I'll think the same thing whenever an actor takes a part in a movie that requires them to sing, and then when they sing, they have like a surprisingly good singing voice. I'll just be watching them like, oh, okay, so this was their real dream. They wanted to be Mariah Carey, they had to settle for being like a 4-time Academy Award winner or whatever. That's Charles Munger and being an architect. And who's to say he can't be an architect? Well, an independent panel of architect students and psychologists. This is an article from Vice. Independent review panel finds UCSB's Dormzilla unwise and poses significant health and safety risks. They've dubbed it Dormzilla. I don't like that nickname because it's like a little bit too cool. Like, I don't want to live in a place with no windows, but I kind of do want to live in a place called Dormzilla. That sounds metal as hell. The 200-page report was the product of 5 months of study by a panel of 13 experts appointed by the school's faculty senate. The panel concluded it could not support the current design unless major modifications are made. While the report cites reams of academic literature and extensive surveying to support its findings that the building plausibly jeopardizes the mental health and physical well-being of future UCSB students, perhaps the most telling aspect is that the word prison appears 41 times, including in a section titled Massiveness and Density Prison-like Design. So this panel has determined it would be unwise to proceed due to significant health and safety risks. Interesting, there's nothing in here about the school immediately canceling their plans. It's so funny to convene an independent panel to determine whether or not you should build a building, have the panel say you absolutely should not build this building, and then just continue building the building. What were they expecting? Were they expecting the panel to come back like, actually windows are lame as hell, this design fucking rips? But Charles was not gonna take this lying down, okay? Presumably because the only rooms in which he could lay down happened to not have any windows. In this article, Charles came to his own defense and just met the criticism head on. Here he says, artificial windows are, in some ways, actually better than the real deal. Yeah, like they're cheaper and, I don't know, less confusing to put into a building design if you have no idea what you're doing. This is like me in high school trying to spin a bad grade to my parents. I'm like, in some ways, the wrong answers are actually better than the right answers. For example, you can get the wrong answers easily and without trying. Munger explains that the reason this building is the way it is because there are enormous advantages in having a lot of undergraduates conveniently near one another and conveniently near everything else they like to be near. The logical way to do that is to make a building in a big footprint and devote the top floor of it, which is a penthouse floor normally given to rich people, for condos, and give that to the students. What do you mean, give that to the students? It's a dorm. It was already for the students. It's all for the students. He's like, I could have made the top floor a penthouse for rich people. No, you couldn't have. It's a dorm building. Were you thinking about doing that, Charles? Charles, were you thinking about making the top floor of this dorm building a penthouse for rich people? Here's an example of a private bedroom at Munger Hall featuring an artificial window with adjustable light. That's just a light. It's not an artificial window just because you keep calling it that. Munger says every student is in a house and suite system, and the house has lots of windows and a big common living space and dining space and kitchen space and so on. And so they're not living in windowless space, to which the interviewer replies, but their bedrooms are windowless. Yeah, they're living in a building that has lots of windows, just not in any of the rooms where they live. What is so confusing about that? If you go on a Disney cruise ship and pay $20,000 a week for a fancy stateroom, it uses an artificial window instead of a real one. Okay, first of all, this guy keeps coming back to the Disney cruise ship. I love the implication that this billionaire clearly went on a Disney cruise and just had a fucking ball. This guy went on a Disney cruise and had the time of his life. I love picturing that. I love picturing this billionaire sitting in a stateroom with goofy wallpaper and no windows. Like, man, this is as good as it gets. You can turn a knob and change the sunlight to brighten it up or down. Yeah, that's a light switch, Charles. That's not a new thing. Also, stop calling it sunlight. We all know it doesn't come from the sun. The interviewer says, but there's a whole bunch of social science research that shows that windowless designs, especially when you're in them for long periods of time, can be quite detrimental to your mental health. Did you look at those? To which Charles replied, we look at actual buildings. We've built these buildings. A Munger graduate residence hall in Michigan has no windows. It works fine. His precedent is another building he built. He's like, it's not crazy I built a building with no windows. Lots of buildings have no windows. For example, all of the other buildings I built with no windows. You're not an architect though, are you? Well, no, but I've been building buildings all my life. That doesn't inspire confidence, actually. That's deeply concerning. That's like saying to someone, you're not a surgeon, are you? And then they're like, well, no, but I've been performing surgeries all my life. What? Gotta go! It was your idea to have the rooms with these fake windows, right? Yes, absolutely. He wants us to know that that part was all him. He's like, there's a lot of things in this design that I didn't have anything to do with. For example, the rooms that do have windows. Don't try to pin that shit on me. I can't believe he did this before in Michigan. Let me look that up. Yep, here it is. He fully already built a windowless dorm in Michigan. I love how nobody cared. Like, literally no one brought up that it was a problem until he tried it in California. They're like, yeah, we all know those freaks at the University of Michigan deserve the darkness, but don't you dare try that shit on the West Coast, okay? We actually have hot people here. They need their tan. You never saw a happier bunch of students, he says directly over a picture of a grimacing student hunched over a textbook. Munger donated $110 million to his alma mater in 2013, and the dorm welcomed residents in 2015. He later told CNN in 2021 that he should have installed artificial windows in the dorm. Yeah, those are the windows he should have installed. Literally everyone is like, these dorms need windows. He's like, got it. Artificial windows, for sure. Okay, this is like my favorite quote of his. If you build a big square building, everything is conveniently near to everybody in the building. If you maximize the light, you get fewer people in the building. Okay, this is why he's not an architect. He's like, if only the building didn't have to be a big square. He wants to be an architect, and yet the only building he can imagine is one giant rectangle. Okay, here's an article where more students talk about how freaking awesome it is to live in a Munger building. Named the Munger Graduate Residences in honor of his $110 million contribution to the project, the building was developed specifically to encourage interdisciplinary collaboration, with students from a variety of programs living in shared suites of up to 7 private rooms. In all but a few of these bedrooms, there are no windows. It's almost weirder that some of the bedrooms do have windows, you know? It's like, man, can you imagine how much power you'd have if you're the one guy in the dorm with a window in your room? It's like winning the golden ticket of randomly being the most popular person in the building. Just everyone in your hall wanders in, pale, looking like Gollum. You're just like, hey guys, do you want to play like Smash Bros? They're like, no, we just want to kind of huddle in the patch of sunlight on your floor if that's cool. It's like, yeah, it's cool. All right, here's one student who didn't seem to mind it. He said, I guess I just got used to it. What a ringing endorsement. It's so funny that Charles Munger was like, I've never seen happier students. Meanwhile, the happiest student is like, over time, I guess I just became numb. Here another student says, if you're someone who definitely needs natural light, then I wouldn't recommend it for you. Yeah, if you're someone who definitely needs natural light. If you're a vampire or an obscure species of cave salamander, you should be fine. This person says they didn't mind it. They said the way that the room was made was to force people to leave their room, and that's exactly what I did. Okay, but that's a bit of a cop-out, isn't it? I mean, by that logic, you could just make the room as bad as you want. Hey, why'd you put scorpions in every room? To get people to leave the room? You're welcome. Charles just sees students fleeing their dorm in panicked fear, like, everything is proceeding according to plan. Another student says she did experience the depressive symptoms of seasonal affective disorder while living in the building, but doesn't blame the space. I had that because it was cold outside, she says. Okay, but you were outside because you couldn't be inside because inside had no windows, so... Okay, I will say there's something to the point that, like, dorms do kind of suck regardless. Like, living in a dorm isn't cool whether it has windows or not. Like, true story, like, when I moved into a dorm my freshman year, I didn't know you had to, like, buy a mattress pad. Like, it never occurred to me. For some reason, like, no one told me. So I spent my entire freshman year, this is true, sleeping on just, like, the hard plastic mattress that, like, comes in the dorm. I spent my entire freshman year just, like, walking around hunched over like Scrooge. And I did have windows. Sometimes a dorm with windows windows is bad if the person living in that dorm is an idiot. So I bet you didn't think of that, independent architecture review board. Also, another reason why living in a dorm sucks is you're living with other people. And a lot of times they suck. Like my freshman year roommate sat me down day one and was like, listen up. I'm gonna be bringing a lot of girls and maybe even some guys back to the dorm this year. So if that scares you, grow up, cause this ain't high school. Anyway, he brought one girl back the whole year and now they're married. And if you're thinking, Robert, that sounds like a viral tweet, it does, but it's my viral tweet. So lay off, okay? Give me a fucking break. Okay, so here's kind of like the final word on the story in the New Yorker. That's right, he reads BuzzFeed and the New Yorker. In 2016, Charlie Munger, the billionaire vice chairman of Warren Buffett's holding company, announced his intention to donate $200 million to the University of California, Santa Barbara to be used to build a dormitory. There was one huge catch, as Munger, an amateur architect, put it: no windows. Okay, they keep calling him an amateur architect. Is he even an amateur architect? Like, you're only an amateur architect until you actually design a building that gets built. Once you've designed a building that actually gets built, you're not an amateur architect, you're just a professional architect who sucks at their job. Dude, the crazy thing is, I bet that bothered him more than anything else. More than the student protest, more than the safety risks. It's being described as an amateur architect. Dude, this article says there's actually other problems besides the windows. Matthew Marino, a computer scientist, joined his partner in the Munger graduate residences last March. It seemed nice at first. There were slate floors and fancy fixtures. The basement had massage chairs, along with a movie theater that didn't seem to play movies. A rooftop garden offered views of Ann Arbor, but when it rained, water ran straight into two stairwells. Marino said there was abundant seepage along with tons of dead crickets. Okay, that's a problem on two fronts. One, there's a fuck ton of crickets. Two, something's killing them. Even the crickets don't like living in a dorm with no windows, damn. There were other technical problems. Errant fire alarms went off constantly. A trash chute malfunction resulted in someone getting bombarded by falling waste. Marino described poor ventilation and even poorer sleep. Lots of talk of sun lamps and melatonin, he said. It almost seems like he led with the no windows thing, so people would be so concerned about that they didn't bother to look into all the other crazy shit going on. Some residents adapted. Wilson Chen, a former pharmacy student, said, the windows thing was a big bummer, but after a year I kinda got used to it. It got super dark. Doesn't sound like you did get used to it. You just said it got super dark. He's like, don't worry, eventually I became one with the darkness. Okay, so let's check in with where the project is now. University of California abandons plans to build windowless dorm Munger Hall. Well, how about that? No more windowless dorms. Unless you're at the Michigan University, you still have windowless dorms. Sorry. This week, after much backlash, UCSB announced that it will not be moving forward with the plans designed by Munger and VTBS. Instead, the administration has issued an RFQ for alternatives to deliver 3,500 students beds with a budget of $600 to $750 million. The Santa Barbara Independent reported Charles Munger has since withdrawn from the project. I like how Charles Munger dipped out of the entire project. He's like, if you're adding windows, I'm fucking out of here. For many, Munger Hall embodied the bottom line driven ethos of corporate philanthropism. Dude, I'm like always talking about how I hate the bottom line driven ethos of corporate philanthropism. That's like one of my least favorite things. I'm at parties like, yeah, you think the new Katy Perry album is bad? Have you guys heard about the bottom line driven ethos of corporate philanthropism? For many, Munger Hall embodied the bottom line driven ethos of corporate philanthropism that often prioritizes quantity over quality. And the sad state of academia where, thanks to funding shortfalls, universities must bow to whoever can pick up the tab. It's not that universities must bow to whoever picked up the tab, it's that they do. They're greedy and they want money. Nobody forced them to accept it. When Charles Munger came to them with a dorm with no windows, they could have said no, because they eventually did say no. The reason they didn't say no at first was just because they were greedy and they wanted the money. Like, if there wasn't an uproar, the university would have gladly just taken the money and made their students pay them to live in prison. That's another thing. Funding shortfalls, they have so much money. Like, all of the students they're housing paid them to live there. Colleges charge so much. In fact, my college charged me so much, I literally had to borrow money in order to pay them. And I am totally gonna pay that money back. And I'm not saying like don't accept donations. Like it's one thing to get all the money you can to make your school nicer, but it's another thing to get all the money you can to make your school actively worse. The problem actually isn't the crazy billionaire. The problem is the greedy school being willing to let the crazy billionaire basically play a game of Sims with their real life students. And really the final news on this insane story is this article that was published shortly thereafter with the news that Charles Munger has ultimately passed away. And I know what you're all thinking. You're all like, wait a minute, the project was scrapped and then he died? That's kind of a depressing conclusion to a video, don't you think? But I'd urge you to look again. Look closer. Don't just look at the fact that he died. Look at where his death was reported. Charles Munger's death was reported in the Architect's newspaper. Charles made it! After spending his entire life and so much of his own money to become an architect, in the end, Charles's death was reported in an Architect newspaper, and his lasting legacy was a building he designed. So when you really think about it, it's kind of a perfect ending.